Good evening. Welcome to the May 25th CRU Task Force meeting. Do the roll call. Albert Nickerson,
Here.
Bill Norris, Bill Sutton, Brian Greenwood. Okay. Buck Nickerson, Chicky Sazwani, Chicky, Cindy Ginther,
Cindy's here.
Jim Saunders, Kim Cole, Pat Langenfelder,
Here.
Paul Ruge, Ray Strong, Sam Shogay, Tom Mason, Tyler Brown. Okay. First item is to review the meeting summary of Wednesday, March 30th meeting. I hope everyone had a chance to review it, look at it. Are there any comments, questions? We don't approve them, but if there's any things that you feel are in error or not highlighted, please mention them now, add them to the minutes. Hearing none, we'll move on. Tonight, obviously, we talk about, we'll get through the old business. Please speak through the chair, respect other views, don't interrupt, and keep the contributions short and to the point. If you're online or on the phone, have your video on and mute button on, and wait for the chair to call your name to unmute. Under old business, we discussed the presentation of the proposed new graphics for individual zoning districts, and that's in your packet. Are there any questions or comments on what we reviewed last meeting regarding those? Staff, do you have any comments on that you wanted to highlight as you prepared this packet? Anything that we Okay, thank you. Okay, under B, we want about the topic of consolidating limited zoning districts. Staff, maybe you make your comments. And
So what we provided to you was a cleaned up version of the nine districts, and what you have in yellow highlighting in that packet is the uses that are in the district that's being eliminated. And you also had for your information.
I'm just going to bring you a different mic, Paula.
Okay.
See if this one.
Okay. Is that any better? Okay. So you had the combined districts in a cleaned up form. That yes, but I don't think on headset. Just there we go. All right, maybe is that better? Okay, I think the mic was accidentally left on. Okay. Third time, it's going to be the charm. Packet, combined cleaned up districts. Yellow highlighting is the uses that are in the district being eliminated. So if you look at the community residential, what's labeled at page 2, you'll see yellow highlighting for public stables. That is currently in rural residential. It's not in community residential. And we are looking for feedback from the task force on, are there highlighted uses that you think should be struck from the resulting zoning district? Are there tweaks that need to be made to some of those uses to make them better fit being in a broader category. And that's probably more specific to the commercial district, which was the combination of Crossroads Commercial, which tends to be very small properties, and the commercial district parcels, which were meant to be much larger. So I don't know how you would like to proceed. If you want to think about it, we can bring it back up again. If you've got the opinions already, let's discuss them. Yes.
Go ahead.
Looking at community residential, one.
That is that's the density. The minimum lot size is 1/2 of an acre. Certainly, yes.
Because I'm looking at some of the things that are being moved over to the residential one. Small lots of these very inappropriate, but I guess in the red, you detail limitations somewhere else, which I didn't look.
Right. And so for a really good example of that is that I believe, I know private stables require a minimum lot size of 2 acres. And you have to have, the number of horses is determined by the acreage of pasture. You can have up to like 4 horses. Once you go over that, it's something, then it becomes a public stable. Community residential is one of the districts that is anticipated that it does still have some farms, so which would be 20-acre or larger parcels.
I just, I will, whatever, where we should go to find the limitations, and I was pretty certain that there had to be rules and regulations. You weren't going to have 4 mules.
No, and I think public stables, I'm going to pull it up. So public stables already require 20 acres or more.
Thank you, that's all.
Yep.
Can you, one more time explain how many horses per acre are you allowed in any zoning? Wasn't there, an equation there?
Yes. So you are, to have a private stable, you have to have at least 2 acres. And then there shall be no more than 1 horse per acre of land. Then as soon as you hit 4 or more horses, then I believe, now we have to go to the definitions. 4 or more, I think, is when it either becomes, depending on the district, a public stable or a special exception. It might be.
A horse can be classified as a donkey, a mule, or a horse. Where do we stop there?
One moment. So a public stable is when you have more than 4 horses or mules. And then there are several districts that allow a special exception for more than 4 horses or mules on land less than 20 acres. So,
But there's still needs to be so much pasture area for each animal. I believe that's going to be the regulation to determine how many animals could go there, I think, Bill.
correct.
I think that's how it works. I think that's the formula
Yeah,
you're looking
that's
at,
what I'm
yeah.
trying to figure out. I mean, 5 acres, suppose it's not all pasture. How many, I mean, what is allowed? And I'm aware of a situation where there's 7 on a 5 acre parcel and only 2 acres of pasture. Is that, I mean, what's the difference between
Then,
commercial or private or, I mean, that's what I'm kind of curious about.
so you're going to have instances where there are some properties that will be grandfathered. I know of at least one that did come in to get non-conforming status as a non-conforming use. You may have situations where somebody hasn't come through to verify how many horses they can have on their property. But if somebody comes to us and says, I want to have horses, we're going to take them to the land use ordinance and we're going to show them the standards for private stables or public stables.
How far back does grandfathering include? Grandfather is a pretty broad term as far as, I mean, in a lot of other instances in our ordinance, we have timeframes. Like for instance, in a subdivision, we go back to 1969. That's a date, it's etched in stone. How about like for this situation? Or is it not just because you had it there, you can't get kicked off or changed or altered or whatever?
Most uses in the code, non-conforming provisions. Two general timelines are years, non-critical area, 1 year. Which means that if you had a use and you stopped it, you have a certain amount of time to re-engage in that use. That's basically what that means.
Or if you had a lawful use of the land under an older ordinance that's no longer lawful under this ordinance, then it can continue. And if you've got something that goes far enough back, the date that's listed is November 18th, 1969.
So if somebody has 8 horses on 2 acres right now, and they've had them there since 18 or that many horses since 1969, they can continue to do that. If they came anytime after 1969, they can't continue to do that.
No, you'd have to review when those regulations came into effect. And because, I mean, there have been multiple zoning ordinances adopted over the years. I think the first one is like 1961. Then I guess there may have been another one in the 60s and then 69. I think there were a couple in the 70s. We know 1989. It's likely that when we adopt a new land use ordinance, there are going to be things that are here that were legal under the 2002 ordinance that because we've remapped something or we've changed uses may no longer be conforming, but would still have a non-conforming use status.
I just think there needs to be consistency, that there needs to be rules. There needs to be stuff etched in stone because everything is depending on somebody's review or somebody's committee or whatever decides that, okay, it's going to be all right in this instance, but not in that instance. And I think that's a major problem that we face with people around here. So
I would say our regulations are etched in stone, and if somebody comes and asks, then we tell them what they are. And if they're doing it in violation, if somebody complains about it and we go out and do an inspection and do the research and it's a illegal non-conforming use, then we can make them remediate and mitigate and remove it. So, I mean, I think there are safeguards in place.
okay.
Anyone else on the committee have any questions for Carla? Anyone in the audience?
This is Cindy. Oh,
Go ahead,
sorry.
Cindy. Go ahead.
This is Cindy Genther. I have a couple of questions. In the commercial district, we are proposing to remove certain uses. such as automobile repair and automobile service stations. My concern would be, do we have any of those in operation, and how many of those exist now that would be non-conforming uses in the commercial district?
We are not proposing to remove any of the uses that are highlighted in yellow. We are looking for the task force to tell us what you want us to do with them. So what's highlighted in yellow in the document that was provided
Yes.
are uses that we are suggesting be added into the combined zoning district, but there might be some that you want to review and either add additional conditions to or potentially remove altogether. I think the example we gave last meeting was about sand and gravel pits in either the rural residential or the community residential district. Is that really an appropriate use? And we're not aware of any sand and gravel pits in either one of those districts right now.
Right. I guess my question was more directed toward the automobile repair and automobile service stations.
We are not proposing to remove those. And in fact, the uses that are highlighted in yellow are going to be allowed on more areas than they are now. So currently, Crossroads Commercial allows automobile repair and automobile service stations. The commercial district does not.
Correct. Right. Yes, I understand that. So it's not, the proposal is not that what's highlighted in yellow is to be removed. Is that correct?
That's correct. It is not to be removed.
Okay. So why were they highlighted in yellow again? I'm sorry. Could you help me understand why?
They are highlighted because for the commercial district, the uses highlighted in yellow are currently in the Crossroads Commercial District, but they are not in the commercial district. So this is suggesting that unless you do otherwise, they are going to be added into the commercial district.
Commercial district. Okay. Thank you for the clarification, Carla. That's fine. Thank you. You answered my question.
Anyone else have a question on this? Anyone online or streaming? Anyone in the audience? Go ahead, step forward and. Yes.
You actually brought, this Janet Christensen Lewis, you actually brought up the one thing that I'm questioning should remain, and that's the sand and gravel pit. I mean, should we have a sand and gravel pit in a residential area? It seems to me that would be inappropriate, or is there some sort of safeguards on that, or?
It is a special exception, and so there are standards on, you've got to have a mining permit. The Board of Appeals can put in conditions to require additional screening or berms or that kind of thing. But I would agree that this is probably one of the uses that I think is most easy to strike out.
Okay. Well,
but we're looking for the task force to make that recommendation as opposed to staff going through and saying, we think this should stay or that should go. We want the task force to provide that feedback to us.
okay. Well, I hope the task force takes a good look at that.
Any other comments? Yep.
I just have one question. Are we supposed to make that recommendation now, or are we going to look at it again? Are you wanting us to review and say today, we would rather you not have sand and gravel pit in rural residential?
I think if you are ready to do that today, that's great. You can start on it today and finish it at the next meeting. I mean, we can, we hope that old business eventually becomes final business.
Final business.
But, we're, as long as you need to review it or work on it or have questions about it, we're here to help you.
Okay. I would just think that would be one thing I wouldn't want in the community residential area. Seems like, because they're rather large enterprises.
They can be, and they can be loud and
Well, yeah, and dusty too, so.
Somebody owned a farm that zoned that, and they had no plans to develop it. And it had really nice sand and gravel under it. We're saying, no, you can't get that sand and gravel. Is that, I mean, because there's those situations, I think, around. It's a question I'm asking, is that definite? Or is that then become an exception or go before the Board of Appeals or a committee?
But Billy,
Is it considered it's under special exceptions,
it's
right?
already a special exception.
Okay.
But Billy, it's zoned residential. This is Cindy. You know, this is Cindy. It's zoned residential. Who would want? You gotta wonder who would want to see a sand and gravel pit in a residentially zoned parcel of land, even if it is big. I mean, I can understand that a sand and gravel pit should go in a industrial or commercial zoning property. It should not go somewhere where it's a zoned residential, in my opinion, but that's why we're having this conversation.
Thank you. For the task force, maybe we could all keep this packet and dwell on this as old business again, because I don't think there was seemed to be a little confusion about what we were.
Sorry
doing
about
there. And so, no, that's not your problem. I would rather we make it, all the good comments we've had, might as well go through it clearly and think about those. Oh, I'm sorry, Paul, go ahead.
Sorry, I got one thing that'll probably muddy the waters totally, but we're looking at the zoning map and districts that exist now. I think we should know what our new districts are going to be. If they're going to stay the same and that's it, fine, let's say that, and then we can deal with it. But if we're going to be changing some of these areas, just as what was brought up, you may have a sand and gravel pit that's 3 miles from a house at this point, but if we change the district boundaries, next thing you know, that district boundary is going to be could be right next door to that sand and gravel pit. I think my feeling is we're kind of getting the cart before the horse. We should be looking at what areas are we going to change? What are we going to combine? How are we going to put it together? I think this chart that was put together is very helpful. I certainly would like to have some more time to look at it than what I did. It was a little tough to read on a laptop, and it was a little tougher to read even on when I picked it up yesterday. But I'd like to look at it and think about it and come up with some proposals. The districts are going to change. They definitely are. And we're going to consolidate some. I mean, you can take this chart, you go down through the chart right now, and there's certain areas that are identical. And yet there are different areas on the map. And I think they need to be combined. We need to know what we're talking about. And then we can talk about the quote sand and gravel pits and everything else and where they're going to be. I mean, yeah, they work well out in an ag district, out where you can't hear and see them. Maybe then you can take care of some good stuff. I can make an example, and it doesn't bother me where it is, but I have a sand and gravel pit 200 yards from my house. And fortunately, it's not that active. I can tell you when it is, but that's just an example of being next to a residential area, which is where I live, and a sand and gravel pit just over the back fence. And I think originally maybe the setbacks were supposed to be 50 feet. Now it's creeping. It's creeping. But
I think you're also making a good point, though, that it's in your backyard and it really doesn't seem to bother you. You knew it was there.
Well, that's
before
true.
Your house.
Absolutely.
And moved here, so.
Right.
There's different. How can we decide some of this stuff without even knowing what anybody else or any landowners are going to request their zoning to be changed to or changed from?
Well,
And that goes to your point, that, you know, there's different. How can we decide some of this stuff without even knowing what anybody else or any landowners are going to request their zoning to be changed to or changed from? Well,
I,
And that goes to your point, that, you know, there's different. I mean, quite frankly, I have not had a chance to study this whole thing. This is a lot of material here to figure out
Correct.
and digest without sitting in a room and discussing things and come up with any kind of answers on what we're going to do now or to accept or recommend anything, because I, for one, whether it's my fault or when I got the material, when I had a chance to look at it, I've not had enough time
Yeah.
to
I mean-
think about half this stuff.
Right.
Okay,
And-
hold on
I'm
a
sorry,
second.
go ahead.
Let, Bill, you stepped over here, so I thought you may want to make some comments about the process, I think.
I do want to make some
Thank you.
comments about the process. So when we started the process, we did initially open it up to everyone and say, hey, we're going to have text changes and we're going to have map changes, sort of the broadest possible way, and invited people to submit what they wished. When we get done with the text, we will once again remind people about that so they can make requests for map changes. But the underlying idea is that in order for people to understand what they would like to request for rezoning for their property, having a text that is already worked through, then they know what they're choosing from. So as opposed to the other way around. So because although the county can and has in the past change zoning for properties from the county's initiative, the focus of the process is to allow people to come in and ask, I'd like my property to be rezoned as blank. And having the text done first allows them to understand what they're asking for. So that's, I mean, there's different ways to do it, but that was sort of the assumption we went under. And regarding the chart on the large scale paper, you all had asked if there was such a chart, did it exist, could we provide it? It's just an information piece. There's actually we're not expecting you to say anything about the chart at all tonight. It was meant to be a reference for when you were looking at other items. So you could, if you decided, hey, where is that use, by the way, I'm curious, you would have it as a reference. So we're actually not looking for input on the great big giant chart. Carla had prepared that some time ago and has kept it up to date. It's sort of an internal working draft for staff, has been for years. So that was just something that you all wanted to look at. So we're not looking for direction on that. That just shows what's currently the state of affairs, what's permitted where. So I hope that helps. So
Thanks,
it wasn't meant to be a homework assignment, Mr. Norris. So yeah, thank you.
If you want something.
No, I agree with Bill. That the chart, we have the chart and I think it's excellent. And I thought that part of this committee was, part of the charge was to simplify the zoning laws, to get rid of some of the, to combine some of the districts, because as you can see by the chart that's been prepared, those districts, there's a lot of districts that are basically the same. You go in there, there maybe is one use different. Maybe that could be discussed, but we need to have the ability, or at least have the time to go through and say, okay, we've got RCD, RC, and RR line. You take all those lines and follow them down, and there's maybe 2 or 3 differences in 4 pages of chart. So they could all be combined
Well, I
into one
think
district.
this is what I think I would recommend we revisit this again,
Right.
but everyone has a chance to look at
Absolutely.
this packet. As the yellow was spelled, that's the idea of the gravel pits, the horse, questions, all those things we can debate and think about.
And this was made, the zoning law has been around for 10, 15 years, 20 years, whatever.
About 20.
The county's changed, and it's going to change more. And I think it's more incumbent upon us to figure out, okay, how do you want the county to change? To give it a little guideline. Yes, you're going to get some people a little upset. They will, unfortunately. Some people will get a little upset. Their zoning may change, or the use of their land may change a little bit. But yes, then you have the Board of Appeals. You have different ways of maybe doing something. But at the same time, you're going to be providing an overall picture of the county and what you want it to be, and you want it in a simpler fashion. If somebody walked in here to do something, I'm not a contractor or a builder or anything, but you've got so many different districts and they're so small and right next to each other. Maybe there's a better way, we should take a look at it and then make the laws fit what we want it to be.
Paul, I am going to point out that sort of the staff and consultants analysis is that we have presented to you the districts that are most similar and most easily combined, which is what you've got now. And I know, I agree that there are some districts that are very, very similar, but for probably very specific reasons they are separate districts. The best example would be the agricultural zoning district and the resource conservation district. And the biggest distinction between those is that one of them is in the critical area and one of them is not, but other than that, they are pretty identical. We certainly look to see if you have any other suggestions, but I think if you really get down into the nuts and bolts of some of it, you're going to find that there actually are bigger differences in the districts than what you can see based on just a strict review of their uses. So.
Thank you, Carla. Any other questions, comments on that? Go ahead.
Could I make a suggestion? I think we've kind of gotten bogged down here, and maybe we ought to give everyone time to look at that part of it and go on to text amendment changes, because we're never going to.
Well, I agree. I think the task force members have a good package. Well, it's easier to read too. I couldn't read it online. It was too small.
Absolutely.
It's always easier to read it
Yeah.
in that paper.
So if they take it, we can revisit. There's some I think the gravel pit seems pretty obvious in the world, as all I think, but there's probably others too.
And
Good.
I'm going to request that if you have specific requests or questions about some of those uses, let us know ahead of time, and then we can make sure that we're well prepared, to pull up whatever that particular section of the ordinance is, and have full answers for you.
Thank you. Appreciate
Very
it.
good.
Chief, can I clarify one last thing?
Yep.
I thought that when we first started this whole conversation, that the highlighted in yellow, I thought I heard you say that those uses were to be eliminated from those sections.
No,
The other way around.
those are the uses that are coming from the eliminated zoning district. So
And they're moving
into,
okay. Makes sense, okay.
yep.
I had to read that twice.
Well, you did your homework, Pat.
I have to agree with you, because I thought the same thing.
It's like, well, wait a minute, so I apologize.
That's okay.
I thought the same
Well, I
thing.
think consensus, we'll just bring this back as old business again.
Yep.
And hopefully we can all take a chance to look at it. Good. New business. Tom didn't even get one today.
We're just yelling back and forth.
Under new business, our first item is the
He'll come to that at the end.
review request to amend forest conservation provisions of the land use ordinance, Article 6, special provision, Section 8, forest conservation, and the packet is here. You win again, Carl?
I win again on this one. But I think this is the last one I have to do tonight.
You don't get to go home, though.
No. So we had a citizen submitted a proposal to make some amendments to the forest conservation ordinance with the intent to strengthen some of those provisions and support the comprehensive plan goals for no net loss of forest. The county's current forest conservation ordinance is based off of the Maryland Model Ordinance from the Forest Conservation Act, but the counties do have the ability to be more restrictive than state law. We obviously can't be less restrictive than state law. And we did reach out to a couple of our adjacent counties to see if they've made any changes to that model ordinance, and found that both Cecil County and Queen Anne's County do have some different standards. Cecil County, for example, has a more stringent standard for afforestation. If you're using a forest retention bank, then it's you have to have 3 times the credit of existing forest for each acre of cleared forest for a project. They require bonding at a higher percentage rate. We've learned that Queen Anne's County is looking at changing the fee structure for the fee in lieu for forest conservation. which was one of the proposals put forward. And again, the comprehensive plan does have some strategies about no net loss of forest. And I think that there is a recognition that the state law, while it is admirable, does not result in a no net loss outcome. And, the county could consider stricter standards to move us in that direction. There was a specific list here from increasing the amount of new forest required for development in certain zoning districts, increasing the forest replacement ratio when you remove forest, increasing the, I think it's increasing the conservation threshold for some districts, increasing the maintenance agreements from 2 years to 5 years, which would also change the bonding requirements, increasing the fees. So we're open to if you have any questions, if you have other thoughts, if you've got different provisions that you think could ultimately result in no net loss of forest, we're willing to hear those as well.
Thank you, Carl. Okay, I hope everyone had a chance to review it. Any comments or questions on this proposal to amend the Forest Conservation Act provisions in our land use ordinance? Go ahead.
Thank you. As somebody who's in the zoning ordinance every day and deals with this, I want one place to go to get forest conservation regs. They're already so complex as they are anyway, and having to go troll through the whole ordinance on the state website and then come to the county website to see if there's any differences. It seems like a very admirable proposal, but in reality, it is just going to create confusion on so many levels. And like I said, I've dealt with it before. I got jammed up with something. It was a change in the state ordinance that we didn't know about, and we were able to get through it. But it just is, it would be like driving through Butlertown and the state speed limit's 55, but the county speed limit is 50, and who's going to pull you over, the state cop, the county cop, and it's just, to me, too many fingers in the pie.
Do you think if they're more restrictive, I mean, this proposal, basically, they're more stricter than the state? Is that, I guess, are there differences besides that?
I have found some differences between the critical area regulations regarding forest than the forest conservation. The main thing I think was interfamily, if I'm not mistaken. I think the critical area interfamily allows more than the state regs or something.
Right. Well, the Forest Conservation Act does not apply in the critical area. So it only applies outside the critical area. And so
another layer of confusion.
all of the critical area law applies in the critical area law, and yes, does have different forest standards.
And then if you get a site that's half in the critical area, half out of the critical area, and you're going, and it just that, I know that worksheet A or whatever is confusing enough in itself, and like I say, it's just so many layers to it when it gets right down to it. So I think the less, the less regulating bodies, the better. And I think that the state regulations are pretty robust myself. I don't think there's any kind of, like you say, zero net loss, but they're pretty robust.
I agree. I think we ought to just stay with what the state says. Why complicate things more or make it more stringent?
The one thing I like here, of course, Cecil County does it more, but increase the bonding requirements, because it seems a shame when we do require it that they're never taken care of.
That is a problem.
I agree with that.
That to me, that develop, whatever, even some of these aren't developers really, but they're people, but it's a shame that they plant trees and no one ever takes care of them, and it's So that part I
It
like.
seems like there's nobody really going out to check and see on them,
See,
you know what I mean?
it comes down to enforcement then.
Yeah. But if they're enforced early on with, I think most of it, you can get away with a lot if you get best first couple of years, but,
I have a question of Bill and Carl and whatever with, you're mentioning bonding, but in a past experience I've had with zoning laws, the community gave up on bonds. We literally went to letters of credit. So that the letters of credit existed so that, let's just say if there was a problem and the town or county wanted to solve it, they didn't have to worry about trying to make a case with a bonding company. They had an automatic, they could just go and make a withdrawal against that letter of credit. It was already there. Has that ever been thought of?
Well, we accept either form of surety. And I will say that most people who need to put up some sort of surety use the letter of credit.
Yeah, because the bonds are awfully tough to deal with, where letters of credit is not all that hard as long as.
Step in the process of bond is.
My understanding is that it's difficult for applicants to get bonds as well, which is why most of them
Yeah.
use letters of credit.
Okay, well, and then maybe we should even mention letter of credit in here.
It is in the actual ordinance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This was
Just
just-
bring that up because the bonds are just,
But the whether or not the amount required is the same if you put up a letter of credit or a bond. So I think it's currently 125% of the estimate.
well, yeah.
And
the
this
amount-
is a suggestion for 200%.
Right, yeah, that would have to be worked out, the amount, but I'm just saying that use of a letter of credit is much easier for whatever entity wants to get the money to fix it.
I don't think we would want to be so inflexible to only require letters of credit, but our language throughout the ordinance does indicate that either one is appropriate. And that will continue to be the case unless we have some change in the law.
The third option of you can just deposit cash, so three options. And that's not why I'm here. I just wanted to say, on this particular item, and normally I don't make a post comment, but Carl and I talked about this, and I think it's well known in not news that the state regulations do not result in no net loss of forest. It just, that's the state regulations don't accomplish that goal. And our comp plan specifically talks about no net loss of forest. So if that wasn't clear from the staff report, I just sort of wanted to remind the group that I think that's what the issue is about. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Any other comments from staff, task force members online?
This is Cindy. I have a
Okay.
comment. I am
ahead.
in agreement with Buck and with Billy that the state standards are, in my opinion, sufficient, particularly because it looks like we're penalizing our employment center, industrial, our growth areas more intensely than obviously than I think we should be on the forest area replacement and the forestation requirements. And I think that will hinder some of our folks who are looking to do development in the areas that we specifically want them to be in. So I disagree with this proposal.
Thank you. Any questions? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I think somewhere there ought to be something in the agricultural zone to distinguish between like a hedgerow that maybe has been there for 40 years and it's become a forest, but now it needs to be cleaned out. That would not be involved in any of this. I mean, would that be right? Or say you had a ditch that over the years, I mean, you can get some fairly large trees in some of those areas that it needs to be cleaned out, that you can do that with no bond or no letter of credit, or, I mean, you can just do it without having to, I mean, there's, maybe, you want to clean up a farm.
Right.
That's, that you don't have, that's not involved in this. And I think that should be distinguished.
Right, and there are, if you were actually to read the full forest conservation section, you will see that there are a number of activities that are exempt. Agricultural activities under certain circumstances are exempt. And one of those, I think, would fall under, there's other related activities constructed using best management practices, provided no more than 40,000 square feet of forest is cleared within a 1-year period. So there are ways to.
Some of that doesn't make sense, because what you can do is you do this 40,000 in December, and then you finish it in January. I mean, it's kind of.
But that is state law, and we can't be less restrictive than what, but there are.
And that's doable.
So, but I mean, there are a full list of, there are currently 14 things that can fall within exemptions under certain circumstances, and sometimes they require declarations of intent from the Forest Conservation Act.
Thank you. Anyone in the audience or online wish to make a comment? Come forward.
Janet Christensen Lewis. Full disclosure, I was the citizen that submitted this request for the Forest Conservation Act. I think it's incredibly short-sighted that the committee is worried about maybe putting some extra burden on development. That's exactly why the Forest Conservation Act was put into place. This does not put any burden onto agriculture. It does not put any burden onto homeowners per se. And in terms of it being difficult, if this is done correctly, you should not have to go to state regs, because this has to be in compliance with state regs or more strict. When you look around into the counties that are not on the Eastern Shore, you look at Montgomery County, Howard County, and Arundel County, their replacement costs are 10 times higher than we're talking about $4, not 30 cents. So they have not seen that their development is being impaired by requiring this. Kent County, because of it's an agricultural county, has the few, along with Queen Anne's County, are the two counties that have the least number of trees present. We need to do something to reverse that. And as it is presently, we're going to have a net forest loss if development continues on this land. That, to me, should be totally unacceptable to anybody that lives here in this county. We need to see it not only because it's a way to have in the future to have, when you talk about net CO2, they're talking about we're going to have to remove CO2 from the air. Trees do that. But the biggest reason to do it is because that's the way that we keep our streams and rivers clean. Trees, we know how much pollution that they prevent from running off. So I just hope that what I put in here, I think what I requested was a minimus amount of increase. It could have been much more, but I think by not accepting this minimal amount of increase, requesting when there's development on land, particularly in places where you're going to be removing already existing forests, would be short-sighted by this task force not to recommend it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the audience or? Anything?
Yeah,
Oh,
Joe?
Well, yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I can't, can you identify yourself,
Okay, hi,
please?
yeah, sure. This is Judy Gifford in Kennedyville, and I want
Okay.
to second what Janet said, that it's very short-sighted, and I think it's kind of ironic that when some people want to make a change, it's like the county's got to change, we got to do something, we can't stay the same. And here we want to make a change that complies with the comprehensive plan, and they're saying, oh, we got to keep it the same. It's too complicated. So, we've got to look at these things consistently. And just because something might be too complicated doesn't mean you can't simplify it, which is part of this process, is to make things easier to find and to navigate. So I don't think that's a very good argument. And really, if you want to look to the future and what's best for our children and our grandchildren that many people claim they support, is increasing trees and preventing deforestation is one of the most critical things that we can do. I think those hedgerows should stay, but I don't want to get run out of town. But hedgerows are the best.
You're breaking up.
Biodiversity and resiliency. So thanks.
All right, thank you. Okay, task force, any other thoughts on this? I guess we heard some comments, but, and I think definitely the bonding needs to be strengthened. And this is a bias from being on the planning commission, but the payment in lieu numbers should be higher because the money that's done there, we get so little money that, we have used it at the park some, but it's a shame when we have these projects that are commercial projects, particularly that benefit from citizenry being here. We don't make our parks better and have more money to devote to, projects that would enhance those. That's where it's been going. But a lot of times the payment in lieu is $800 or something like that. So to me, I think those things are important. Go ahead.
I have a question so if a parcel in the commercial district and it's going to be developed into something, okay? If they're not clearing any trees or anything to build it, there's still afforestation, correct?
That's correct.
And does it have to be done on the property, or the payment in lieu? I get that, but that's like Joe just said, it doesn't really get much money back. But are they supposed to put trees up on the property or the parcel where they are developing?
In the commercial district, it varies by district in terms of what the preference is, whether it's on-site, off-site, fee in lieu.
Okay.
So generally, the commercial and industrial districts, off-site or fee in lieu is more acceptable than on-site. And by off-site, if the property owner has another property and they want to deed restrict forest there, they can. If somebody wanted to establish a forest mitigation bank, which has to be intentionally planted afforestation, and then sell the credits to somebody who might need them, that option is available as well. So you don't have to plant on the property to meet the afforestation requirement if you've got a completely cleared property. And we do work with landowners for what might be appropriate.
Okay.
I'll give you an example if it's okay.
Yeah, sure, go.
Gromar used to be Southern States up to Kennedy or Massey behind Winger Feed. Southern States went to ISE or ISA or however you say it. They wanted 10 acres to build that facility along the tracks. The Forest Conservation Reg said 20% of the site had to be forested, so we had to go back and get 13 acres. We took 2.5 acres out of ag production and put it into trees to support the fertilizer facility. So those are the kind of things where it seems counterintuitive to me to be pro-agriculture, but then we take land out of agriculture and plant it in trees. And and with that, and I totally agree with Joe, the bonds definitely need to be upgraded, and that fee in lieu of it is way too cheap.
Yeah, because that gives them a trade-off easily to just write a check as to try to do anything, at least try. Go ahead.
Can I just address what Buck just said? There's numerous ways in which you can accomplish the Forest Conservation Act. It does not mean that you have to take 2 acres out of agriculture. That's the choice that was made in that particular case. But that is not necessary. You have many options for doing it. You can put it, you can go somewhere else within the river shed. You can put it along a river. You can do all kinds of things. But when people are looking for the easiest way out, they may take 2 acres out of agriculture. But that's not because that's the way the Forest Conservation Act is written. The Forest Conservation Act gives you numerous ways to satisfy it, to satisfy the issue. And taking land out of agriculture is an option that people might choose, but they should be encouraged and they should think about, this isn't just a regulation for people to say, okay, well, I have to do this. I mean, they should be thinking holistically about what's good for the county and trying to, in their best way, understand why we have the Forest Conservation Act and how it can be beneficial to the county and to implement it in such a way as to do both those things. So
I think your time would better be spent going to the state and petitioning the state to make the forest conservation.
We have
regulations
petitioned,
more
we have
robust.
petitioned the state forever, but you happen to know that it's very difficult to get the state to move on regulations like this, number one. And number two, there isn't a single county in Maryland that hasn't made their regulations much more strict than what the state has. So that's all I can tell you. You won't find, on the Eastern Shore, we have lagged behind only doing the minimum. But in the last 5 years, Hartford County, Howard County, Montgomery County, and Arundel County, Allegheny doesn't have to do it because they have lots of trees. They haven't really stripped their trees, but you just won't see it. Now, we lobbied the state every year to change the Forest Conservation Act at the state level. Unable to do that, the counties have picked up the slack and are doing what needs to be done. Maryland has a terrible history with cutting down their trees. That's why the Bay is one of the reasons why the Bay is so polluted, is because of the amount of deforestation that we've seen, particularly with all of the development that has occurred. And, having the Forest Conservation Act allows for Maryland to try to reclaim, but we're nowhere near reclaiming the amount of trees that, particularly in the 80s and 90s, the amount of trees that were cut down within the state of Maryland. And that's why the Forest Conservation Act came into being. When you go to the state level, you've got all kinds of people that are lobbying against any changes. But the counties have been able to do it. They've been able to stand up and they've been able to say, but this is our county, this is our home, and this is what we want for what we're doing here.
Thank you. Did you have something?
I just got one question that I'll admit to not being totally familiar with the Reforestation Act, but buffer zones and whatever that we require planting of trees and whatever, does that count as part of that property that is being reclaimed?
Like if you had I don't know.
Let's say you had
In Kent County, we don't have buffers at the moment. I did one with a buffer zone between 2 zones. It was a commercial zone that backed up to agriculture. We planted trees out from it as part of the buffer. I think it did count as.
The reason I ask is
I think they allowed.
You're talking about site plan planting.
Yeah, site plan plantings, but it would be tree, if you.
I understand, but that's not the buffer, it's site plan trees.
And that was something that the planning commission at Queen Anne's let us do. Let us count the buffer yard towards our.
I mean, I'm just curious. I'm just putting it out there because it's plus the plantings would be plus trees versus cutting them all down. I just didn't know if that would count toward it. I mean, a prime example, everybody seems to be familiar with the solar panels that are going in down in the county south of us, out on John Powell Road out there. All those trees that are planted along there, would they count as reforestation?
I don't know because it's not Kent County. So I can't answer for what
Well,
the
let's
different
put it
counties'
in- let's say
regulations
that
are.
happened in Kent County.
That was
Would
the best question answer we've had all day, Carl. It's easy.
Would that count as reforestation? I mean, if that happened in Kent County?
It would depend. There's a minimum width of trees that have to be planted before it can start to count as forest.
Okay.
I'm not saying that it can't. I'm not saying it can because it's too hypothetical. So,
Sure, I'm just throwing it out there because it's, I mean, we're talking about, plus trees versus minus trees, and it is planting, as it is supposedly going to be trees. That some of the buffers I've seen don't grow very high, but it would be nice if they did.
Maybe we should outlaw concrete and asphalt too.
Mr. Rugi, just to address your point, I think the idea of forest is that it's not just trees, it's a functional habitat. So there's depths, there's species, there's all kinds of other things that happen. So in some cases, I mean, I think a very well-designed, by a landscape architect who's, purposely trying to create a forest that's at the edge of another, at an edge of forest, I could see where that's possible. But I think in general, site plan plantings don't create the sort of depth and width and habitat that would be considered forest. I mean,
Well,
it would be a hard stretch.
I have no problem with that. I'm just curious because maybe it's something that
Regulatory.
that question may come up at some point.
Regulatory wise, I'm sure you can, work into that. But the idea of a forest is that it's more of a place than just a planting. So,
A forest as we think of it as a forest.
Thank you, Bill.
you're welcome, sir.
Any other comments or questions? We want to take a break or want to move on? You want to take a break?
Please.
Okay, we'll take a break and we'll come back to the marine zoning district provisions.
and just remember the YouTube and the audio recording will stay on.
You are live.
For what you printed out. Oh, okay. I'm not going to drop that off. I think your daughter is leaving. She has printed it for you. I have a color copy. A moment, okay.
Beyond the words, right? Right here. Area.
What do you think? I think we should cede the entire county to Queen Anne's and say, let's be done with it. We're not the same as them. Yeah. I give it, they're moving some forest trees, but it's not going anywhere. Oh, it's not going to go back. Seeds, whatever, trees are, either a healthy piece, everything, whatnot, which is a little bit out here. It's not good for building unless you got, had some perks, stuff like that. It's not gonna grow anything. It can't be wetlands or, you can't tell them, you're not supposed to move anything out of them. Right. Good trees. So, it's kind of like, yeah, that's what I was. What you get to do is decide what we want the territory to. We don't. I think they're open titles on some of them. They could. Usually, add it in the background because number one, it's not hot air over the Yep. Ag is good, but it doesn't pay the tax. It doesn't pay the taxes. It doesn't pay the taxes. She won't get in a farm. People that struggle with those taxes, you want to get in a farmers make some money in that, I want to do with it,
We're about ready to get started again.
Oh. We go back to work. Text him for help.
No, no. No, he left. All right, we want to get started again. Thank you. Our next item is review request to revise marine zoning district provisions, Article 5, Section 13. And I think Bill's going to help us there.
Thank you. I'm going to try.
Thank you.
So the specific text amendment before you requests changing the multi-level storage of boats from a special exception to permitted use and make some changes to the provisions under that special exception or proposes changes. It also requests or suggests the elimination or revision of country inn provisions, permitted dwelling units, and conference centers, resorts, retreats, and hotels, as well as the height restriction in order to try and expand residential uses in the Marine District. And it concludes with a request related to allowing utility scale solar in the Marine District and also to allow structures and modified buffers. The report's lengthy. I'm going to just sort of touch on some highlights. We're looking to get the task force's reaction to the request and sort of give us some direction on what you would like us to entertain. Regarding the multi-level storage for boats as a permitted use versus a special exception, I think staff pointed out that there may be some reasons for having that enclosed. It may be beyond just visual. There might be things like weather issues, et cetera. Allowing the open end of the building to face a roadway allows for easier transfer of boats into storage. And the issue of whether or not the enclosed storage should be oriented away from the street as a permitted use is a policy matter. On a lot of these things, these really are policies. In the past, a lot of our text amendments have done things like request us to fix something that's broken. This is more modifying our policies. Regarding expanding allowable residential uses, staff has pointed out that there is already a very flexible residential component allowed in the Marine District. It's called the Private Destination Residence Clubs, and we've provided the standards that are existing in the code. It's a permitted use. It has a number of standards, but the idea was to create a flexible residential use that would not be easily converted into just a standard residential use. I think the goal for that use is that it's tied to the marina use. It's not just a residential option on the property. I think my understanding is in the past there was concern about marine districts getting converted over to residential uses and trying to protect that as a marine based use. Regarding the height restrictions request, 38 feet is the current height in most of our residential districts and throughout the county, and that's why it was chosen for the Marine District. The proposal asks for a larger lodging facilities to be allowed, and the height restriction be reconsidered. Regarding allowing new conference centers, new resorts, new retreats, new hotels, and new motels, the comp plan talks about allowing expansion for those that are existing. And we have a growth allocation policy that also envisions the protection of existing businesses and wouldn't allow new uses in this category. Regarding the request for solar arrays, this just basically allows for other options, and the request is that that something larger than 5 acres be permitted in the Marine District. The land use ordinance does treat the marine districts differently than other commercial districts, and this is assumed by staff to be due to their location next to residential zones. Other commercial districts allow for more intensive uses, including utility scale solar arrays. So I think careful consideration would be needed to recommend approval of that. And then regarding changes to water dependent uses, many of our regulations in this area are tied to critical area commission, and we cannot make the rules less stringent. And then finally, there was a mention of the definition of water dependent facilities. And so we've put forward what our definition is compared to COMAR definition, and it really is, they walk in lockstep together. So the purpose of presenting this all is that, again, this is sort of a policy approach request as opposed to fix something that's broken request. And wanted to walk through each one. Staff's provided some discussion about the different issues. And then from our point of view, we would hope the task force would pick some of these issues that you want to comment on and give us comments about what direction you would like to take in those areas. And I'm assuming in all of these that if you don't give comments that we're not going to move forward with changes. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Bill. Questions or comments from task force members?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
And Carla, I think you and I have talked about this before, but I just want to make sure I'm thinking right. You can have a marine zone that's IDA or LDA, correct? Just because it's marine, it's not necessarily an IDA designation?
In the county made the choice this last rezoning that all of our marine districts are IDAs.
Okay.
You could theoretically, I guess, have a marina if it's, like a large housing development has sort of a whole community facility that's would be regulated as a marina, but is not really a marina. And that could still be an LDA.
To change from LDA to IDA, is that where growth allocation comes in?
Growth allocation would be required. So if we wanted to expand any of our marine districts or add new ones, then it's going to require growth allocation.
Even if it was zoned resource conservation district and you wanted to change it to marine, it would still take growth allocation?
It would take twice the amount of growth allocation.
Really? Interesting.
Because you would have to take growth allocation to get it to an LDA, and then from an LDA to an IDA. And
Can you explain?
so as I think many of you are aware, the critical area is the land, all of the land within approximately 1,000 feet of mean high tide is designated within the critical area. And within that area, there are 3 types of designations. One is the resource conservation area, which for Kent County is equivalent to our resource conservation district. So that is the undeveloped land that is still pretty much in its natural state, very low density. Then the next designation that the law makes is for limited development areas. For Kent County, that is going to be our critical area residential, commercial critical area. I think they're listed in the very beginning of the land use ordinance. We had to go through, so it's critical area residential, commercial critical area, and industrial critical area LDA. So those are the areas that have some development, but it's not too intense. And then finally, you have intense development areas. And Those are our intense village critical area, which we currently don't have any map because it was annexed by Chestertown. And the Marine District, and then we also have critical area, industrial critical area, and again, there's no map plan for that area as well. And then there are a couple of special things that have been added through text amendments related to uses. So the intense development area is again, it's what it says it is. It's intensely developed. It doesn't have the same restrictions on lot coverage that you find in RCAs and LDAs, but it has other water quality requirements. Again, the whole idea is we're protecting the water quality of the Chesapeake Bay. So that sort of explain.
It's got me going in the right direction.
It's a separate system from zoning, but it's related because of the way we set up our zoning. What's that?
Many, I'm going to say pretty much all other jurisdictions use a critical area overlay. So they have their underlying county zoning, and then if the property is in the critical area, then those specific critical area regulations are overlaid. And again, it's going to depend on what that underlying land use is, whether it's an RCA, an LDA, or an IDA.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Bill, for that. Comments, questions from the task force members?
One more question on the Marine District. Where are all the Marine districts? Because you just mentioned some of were incorporated into the towns.
Well, if you are Marine District are, if you know the list of marinas, that's where our Marine districts are. So there's.
So essentially,
Chester.
Essentially it's the marinas.
It's the marinas, yes. And a couple of the areas have a little larger bit of land than just where the actual marina is. Because either at the time it was envisioned the marine uses that were on those properties might want to expand, or there were marine uses that have now gone out of business.
So I mean, I was just looking at the map that I was provided, and unfortunately you got it color coded, but couldn't find too much.
They're very small properties,
Very small.
but
I see
Wharton Creek Marina,
Well, that explains it. If it's the marinas, then
it's the marinas. If you know those lists, you're going to be able to find our marine zoning.
Anyone else have comments? The one thing I noticed, and the marina's great economic engine, they're good for the county and all, but all of them here are near residential areas. And I understand his concerns, and they're well taken, but it seems to me they shouldn't be allowed by right. They should be special exceptions because they're all next to residential, and a 55-foot boat building, I think, is something that, the neighbors need to be able to see the site plan, comment on it.
I think if it's the marinas exist, you're going to have houses around it because it's just, people are going to want to build. I mean, it's a desirable area to build a house.
Oh, yeah, and they know their neighbors now, and then my sense is what happens when you intensify it, maybe you should intensify it, but that it shouldn't be by right, I think.
And I agree with you on the height, because get up to 38 feet, and then you're blocking somebody's, again, now you're blocking people's view sheds as well, as it just doesn't look quite right. And to give you an example, go down to Kent Island, where they've got one of those boat motels or whatever. That's really what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And it's just a huge building that probably isn't going to fit the character of the area.
Well, I think that's something that I think that the public deserves a right to see the review,
Correct.
to have the
Oh,
review
absolutely.
process.
Absolutely.
I mean, like I say, I like to see these marinas be successful, but they were all built there and then developed around, or vice versa.
I think right now there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of repositioning. I think this is before about some kind of discussion that
Yeah, well, I shouldn't, because the narrative says, and friend and use the marina there. And, you know, you want it to be successful. And I think he's got, or some of them, he probably has more space than anybody to help make it successful. But I think there are neighbors too. Of my thoughts. Does anyone in the public have any comments or questions, either online or in the audience?
But oops. One thing I hope they all have, by law they should, is public stations.
I think that's required, I believe.
But I think it's law, but few years back, they were not all in place.
Thank you, Bill.
And if you go up, cap it at 38 feet, but you're running out of ground space too for operations such as that, because those boats are pretty big.
I agree. But the marinas do provide a, valuable they're a great economic engine, have people come in and spend a little money and not use all the services.
Joe, there's somebody online has their hand up. I think it's Albert.
Can you tell? Yeah, oh, go ahead.
It's Albert, Joe. I just want to say that I also think that the neighbors should have a voice in whatever changes are made.
Thank you.
The existing neighbors to the
exactly.
Marinas.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments? Thank you, Carl and Bill, for that education on marine districts and this. Our next item is the review of request to parking regulations for parking maximums instead of parking minimums, Article 6, Section 1.
Yeah, I'm going to save Bill's vocal cords a little bit. Okay. So in essence, this is a request to address parking requirements within Kent County. Specifically, request is to have parking minimums to switch them toward parking maximums. Minimums create induced demand. Parking minimums and other car-focused infrastructure create induced demand, meaning we're building car dependence, which requires people to drive instead of building alternative transportation for biking and walking. With parking maximums, we can require parking for bikes, motorcycles, and routes to connect to either existing or future pedestrian and bike infrastructure. So the question before the task force is to provide commentary in regards to the notion of requiring parking maximums as opposed to parking minimums as a mechanism for incentivizing alternatives to just a car-dependent society.
Okay, thank you. And any comments or questions from task force members? Go ahead.
If you're going to have parking maximums, if there's an overflow of cars, where do they go? And who's going to enforce it?
So in this sort of scenario, parking maximums, just like parking minimums, are something that is reviewed at site plan. So if you meet the standards and you construct the facility based on your approved site plan, then you've met your requirements. In places that implement this, there's a lot of times there's a lot of on-street parking, and that's where overflow goes. So it may not fit all circumstances, but that's sort of the approach.
But if you have on-street parking and then you want to have bicycling, you put cars in the ways of bicycles, and now you got cars, bicycles, and then the roadway, which you're starting to see in various areas, and that gets pretty dangerous. Unless you have separate places for the bikes to go, i.e., some sort of bike paths and things like that.
Bike lane, something like that, yeah.
But the biggest problem I have is maximums. If you build a business and you say, well, gee, I'm going to need 20 cars, and then you have a successful business, and your maximum is 20, what do you do with the rest of the customers' cars? And in this area, this is a rural county. that you're gonna have a tough time coming up with some kind of public transportation. I'm sure the commissioners are not gonna wanna put in a whole bus system. And, and that's what that's also what happens, or,
Commissioners are actually working on a bus system.
I'm sorry?
The commissioners are actually working on a bus
Well,
system. Yes, they are.
Oh, maybe I left something out of the bag here.
That can come.
But at the same time, I mean, you can see what I'm saying, you're looking for public transportation. If you've got a rural area, trying to put in public transportation gets tough and very expensive.
Mhm.
So, I think I guess I have to say, unless I see a few better arguments, I'd probably be a little opposed to the maximums. Because I just don't see how they can be enforced. And that's like saying, okay, you can have a house and you got a 2-car garage, so you're allowing two cars to park in there. Next thing you know, you got 4 cars, 2 cars, 2 pickup trucks, and Kent County school bus or something like that, which I have somewhat of an experience with. Then they're parking on the lawn, they're parking all over the place. They're not parking where they're supposed to. And it just happens. I mean, it's, families grow, kids get cars. And I'm using a residence as an example, but it's the same with the business. The business grows. How do you increase the, you've got to provide enough parking, but how do you control the expansion of a business? You don't want to if you can help it. You want to see them be successful. Where do they go? Where do the customers go with cars? You have a restaurant that's got, prime example in town would be Louise's. Anybody goes to eat there, they got to park out in the middle of you got to park out in the parking lot for the other stores and walk over. Because it wasn't designed, that area was not designed well enough, or it wasn't designed with enough parking to handle what the business can handle for people. And that's probably not a good one because it's got parking areas pretty close, but there are others, certainly others.
In most of our reviews we've had on commercial and retail districts, they complain that we require too much parking, most businesses. And part of that's cost, I understand, but most of it is because it's fluid. People come and go and they don't want to have parking for the maximum because they assume it's always going to be it's cycled through.
Nothing is telling them they have to build parking at one time. As long as they have the line.
With minimums they do. With minimums they do.
Well, with the minimum, okay.
I mean, I think the reality is, and I don't know where, except maybe Dunkin' Donuts, but everything else seems to always have some open spots, places that you see generally, because they're fluid, the restaurants and the stores. And honestly, the same thing. I mean, in downtown Chestertown, people complain when they can't park right in front of their building, but they can also walk a block and park everywhere, but everyone complains about the parking. But I think it is this more attuned to urban type settings, but I think it's an idea to maybe you'd be more flexible on parking. Maybe that's what we do. Instead of being so strict, we have more flexibility.
All I'm saying is if you have a minimum and they build to the minimum that is requested, then they can always expand it versus if you have a maximum, granted, maybe they could come in and ask for an expansion of the maximum, but they're doing the same thing. The maximum, I still go back to how do we enforce the maximum? If the business is given a maximum of 15 lots and all of a sudden, now they have 20 cars parked all over the place, how do you enforce that?
Well, it's self-enforcing. You won't have a place to park. I mean, you won't park there. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
But go ahead. Oh, go ahead, Cindy.
So to support this suggestion, perhaps we just consider reducing the minimum number of parking spaces in various zoning districts.
Thank you. Does anyone in the public have a question or comment? Come forward, please.
Should have sat closer.
Yeah.
Jenna Christensen Lewis. I actually agree with Cindy Gunther. I think that this is not an item that can be translated into a rural county, but I do think that Kent County should look at their parking requirements and see if they're too many. I mean,
It's rigid,
there may
I
be
think.
there may be places where you don't need that many. I mean, I think there should be more flexibility and let people decide. But I don't think that you could do a maximum. I think that that would be inappropriate to put some sort of maximum. I agree. I mean, in downtown Chestertown, you can't ride your bike because you'll get hit by one of the car doors opening when you're going down High Street. So, you know, I mean, bikes in areas that have congested traffic are pretty dangerous unless you have dedicated bike lanes, which we don't have, and we don't have transportation. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from anyone on staff? Yeah, I think we kind of, this parking is an issue. Maybe this isn't the way to handle it. And obviously I think the flexibility idea with Cindy and Ms. Lewis said it was good. Anything else? Move on. And we're at, this is review request to amend setbacks in the village district for agricultural uses on village zone land.
Sir. For those who have a paper packet, the copier went a little crazy today and I had to reorganize things, and apparently I've put item E in front of item D. So we will be doing item D next and then going back to item E if you're in.
Okay, sorry.
I apologize for that. The request for item D is, as you said, it's to amend the village setbacks for farm stands, and also raises the issue of allowing roosters as part of backyard chickens. Regarding the request to allow for a farm stand, the addition of a quote roadside stand to the village district, which is already an accessory use allowed in a number of other districts, would address this issue. The actual language for what a roadside stand allows is included. I think the nature of the request is that by observing the 20-foot setback, the stand is far enough away from the road that it might not be visible. If roadside stands were added to village district, then it would, as the name implies, be able to be right next to the road at the edge of the property. Regarding roosters, provided the text from the zoning, from the land use ordinance regarding chickens, and also some materials from the American Planning Association regarding livestock. And I'll quote from the quote in the report: a frequently prohibited animal, the rooster poses no more public health threat than chickens, which are widely allowed. I think there's concerns about noise, usually what's related to roosters. And we're sort of looking for your all's direction on those two topics. I do want to note that I want to thank Carla for that suggestion of roadside stand. I thought that was a great way to address the issue. So thank you very much, and happy to answer any questions.
I think stands very careful. Makes a ready to put on it. It's a great anchor. Nobody was killed over the years after the 20 moved it to his house. I've seen people on the opposite side of the road. It's a nightmare. And I guess the people that took that upon themselves to make it a safe place have to come up to the barn and where he stores his all the veggies. I don't put that in the head, but I think it needs to be very careful on a street road or off the road in the man's yard or whatever.
Thank you, Bill. Anyone else on the committee? I think Bill's point about safety is important here. I think there's places, roads that you could do it on, and some that you would certainly don't want to be even 20 feet from.
But I think the one Bill's talking about is actually agricultural zoning, so
Yeah.
that's not, but part of the problem is our village zoning is so diverse. some places, yeah, it'd be dangerous, and other places it wouldn't make a difference. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, you look at Morton, if someone there that wanted to have a big garden, wanted to put it out on their lawn, there's a nice big shoulder there, probably below,
Right.
because it's supposed to be 35 there, I think, or 25.
There in Meltoda, where that's all there in that corner. Got a roadside stand there, but there's plenty of room to pull off.
But the 20 feet, I mean, there's 20 feet isn't much, so I mean,
No.
so, I mean, I don't know, they need to be right on the road,
Where do you measure the 20 feet?
I guess from the edge of a property line.
Yeah, but some of the property lines get better than the road.
Well, the county roads, yeah. County right of way then, there you go. Anyway, it's.
Well, I was thinking, village, Kennedyville's village, 213 going to Kennedyville, extremely narrow. And for someone that, where are they going to pull off?
Right.
To go to the stand, if someone in Kennedyville, just saying, we'll use that as an example, wanted to have a roadside stand, edge. Even, I can't use McHenry's farm because they broke the lane, but one of the houses along the had a large vegetable.
Yeah, and that, like I say, that's a county road, right? Yeah, that's a county road, Kennyville Road, but, yeah, yeah, but I'm talking about the other, they had, where, the other side, they have, and they grow veg, they don't sell, I mean, they sell because you park there, but, there's no place there's no shoulder there on that road at all. It just,
That's, I mean, would it be by right, or we could have to judge to one?
No, well, I think if you look, roadside stands do require use permits. And one of the requirements is that adequate off-street parking is provided. So that is part of the review, when somebody would come get a use permit to have a roadside stand. And the use permit would be reviewed by any agency that's appropriate to review it, just like with building permits, so.
how about roosters?
Against roosters. Somebody gets a rooster, I'll get a peacock.
Of course, this is one of those same
Joe?
things. Go ahead.
This is Judy Gifford again. I have two neighbors with roosters. I love them. So most people aren't even up when the roosters are crowing, so you won't even know it. But I don't think there's a problem with roosters, and mine are pretty far away, but I can still hear them. And I'd love to get a peacock if my neighbor got a peacock. So that might not be such a threat.
That's the next door neighbor.
Thank you. Anyone else have any comments on that? Yes, ma'am.
Good evening.
Hi.
I actually submitted this
Oh, good.
request. I would like to comment a little
Good.
bit.
What's your name, please, for the record?
Olga Brooks.
Nice meeting
So the 20 feet requirement, I was planning on potentially placing a farm stand, and where my property is located, I have plenty off-street parking. However, if it will be 20 feet away from the property line, it's a potential hazardous condition where the accident will occur, because if someone is driving by and they see the stand already on the right of them and they're going to make a hard stop instead of just driving into the driveway, that creates a very bad situation on the road, especially narrow road. That's what I have. And that was my concern. While if you have a farmstead in a visible location, not on the road, obviously, but within certain requirements and visible distance, it will be much easier to gauge the distance and to come to the full stop or to make a turn.
So you're saying if it was set back, they wouldn't see it till they're by, and then they come
Exactly.
down. Okay, can understand that.
I just can see accidents happening all the time. And it wouldn't be a good situation. Even though there is plenty of off-street parking, it just wouldn't really work in a narrow road, if you think logically how it's going to work.
Okay.
And that was one of the reasons why I was proposing for my property, my personal property, to become agricultural. I understand it could be difficult to change the village zoning for everyone, but when I thought about it, you know what, everyone probably has the same situation with narrow roads in Kent County, and we probably will face the same difficulties, where 20 feet is way too far.
Okay. Cool.
And as for the roosters, I would like to make a comment. That was my request as well. I can understand there can be nosy, maybe some provisions can be put in place where if the neighbors complain or if the rooster makes too much noise, and however you can determine it. But at the same time, and nowadays, being self-sufficient is a big plus. And I think Kent County allowing roosters will be beneficial for the residents of the Kent County, where the chickens can reproduce naturally and continue their lives, happy lives, and at the same time produce eggs and meat for the owner.
And I agree with you. I wish we could have all zoning or conditions handled politely, but that's the problem is if people that own the roosters are careful how they handle them and the neighbors, it's not a problem, but it becomes a problem when they're not taken care of properly or.
So obviously if the neighbors complain, that becomes a situation where the noise is not within the standards, so maybe the people not happy with that period. So I think those particular individuals should not be allowed to have roosters just because it does not benefit the society around them. However, if everyone is happy, as one of the residents had mentioned, why not please everyone at the same time, right?
Right. We wish we could do that in our land use ordinance, but we have a hard time with that. But thank you for that. What comments or questions for the applicant? Thank you.
But, Joe, what if someone got a guinea? They have guineas? You wanna make something, make some noise, just have a guinea. I mean, where do we stop something? That's where we're here.
Well, it's very specific that you can have backyard chickens are defined as females of the species Gallus domesticus.
That's only a chicken?
That is only a chicken.
So guineas are outlaws.
No guineas, no ducks, no geese, no peacocks.
Well, I'll tell you what I'm really upset about. We've got a woodpecker. 6:30 every morning, he starts pecking on this tree outside, so we need to ban woodpeckers. Can we do that?
Woody's not gonna like it.
I mean, where do you start and stop some of that stuff?
Well, I think the point, if you have operating a village, a business like that in the village district, you're polite to your neighbors because you want to have a good business. That's common sense.
Have we ever had complaints on the roosters?
We had,
The planning commission had this several years ago while I was on the planning commission. That place was packed all about chickens and the roosters.
In Crestview.
It was going on forever, fighting over the chickens.
Yep, I know what you're talking about.
That's why it says no roosters.
Mr. Chair,
Right now, the chickens
Yeah.
are gone,
All right.
the fox is still around.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Sutton.
we had so much problem at the planning commission was that the lady or the people would not keep them in
Right.
place. And who wants chickens to walk around your yard? And you gotta walk through your yard when you're trying to choose. So what?
I think, yeah,
The lady was, I remember, I told her, the lady, you got to keep your chickens.
thank you, Bill. Any other questions or comments about that one? I guess, can we move on to the next? Which would be, now we're going to do back to where
Now we can do item E, which is also about village.
right, Bill, okay, there we go.
Accessory structures.
There you go, accessory structures. Go ahead, thank you, Bill.
Oh, you're welcome. So this particular proposal was submitted by email. The request addresses adding a structure closer to the road than the home. Talked about flexibility and the limitation of septic reserve areas, and also that there should be more support for small farms like the person submitting the request, about 6 acres. They noted that they were denied the agricultural rate, I'm assuming it means tax rate, for farm building permit because we had less than 20 acres. So regarding the setbacks for accessory structures, such structures are already allowed in the area between the primary structure and the required setback. We've talked about this actually in a previous item. So the front yard setback in the village district is 20 feet. So right now, if as long as the house is further back than 20 feet, you could have a building up to 20 feet in that yard. But currently the village district wouldn't allow you to put a building within that 20-foot front yard. Regarding the septic reserve areas, that's actually a health department matter. We cannot address that. And finally, regarding farms, currently the land use ordinance talks about farms being defined as 20 acres. I believe this group was supportive of that the last time we talked about it. And in fact, the appraiser's office determines the tax status of the property based on a number of things. And small properties might be taxed as farms if they meet certain income limits. So that's sort of our feedback on that. I just wanted to get your all's idea about how you wanted to handle that. We could certainly change setbacks in the front yard for accessory structures. That would be that's an option. It can be done. It's currently not done that way. And I don't know if you want to readdress the idea of the size of farms or not. So.
And I'm going to add one more point of information. Nope. No, this was this particular property and others that are similar, when they came in to put in what they were calling an agricultural structure, were charged a building permit rate as if it was a residential accessory structure. And they took issue with that they couldn't get the farm building permit rate.
So it's about permits as well.
Mhm.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And when you decide that, how do you decide it? By use or by zoning district?
In terms of whether or not a building can get the agricultural rate, which I think is $50, it's based on does it meet our definition of a farm?
So it's the 20.
So it's the 20 acres.
Okay.
Yep.
Thoughts?
I'm going to say we've also had people who have 20 acres who have brought in residential accessory structures that clearly were residential accessory structures and were charged that permit fee. So they needed a garage.
Yeah.
So.
Thoughts from the task force? Bill, I'm still a little confused on the set. So basically the house is 20 feet back. They want to be able to build this accessory structure, whether it's not in front of the house, but in the front footprint of it, or not just the side yard, the backyard. They want to be in the front yard of it. With what restrictions? I mean,
Right. Well, the request says adding a structure closer to the road than the home. That really depends on where the home is. So
right.
I think Carl is actually familiar with this property because you work with them. Is their property have additional area between the home and the 20 foot? It does. So they could theoretically put put what they want to do within 20 feet of the road and it would be in between the house.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to say that this is one of those instances that sort of falls under a reasoning for clarifying some of our language, which we have already discussed in dealing with these types of accessory structures, because I think it's one of those things that has had varying interpretations.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The only my concern without knowing what is in the village district, the design standards, a lot of people in this county, it's because of the nature of work and self-employment. We have in residential areas, they put up large garages, barns, because it's the nature of their trades.
Mm-hmm.
And that you don't want to ruin the character of a village by having people put these more commercial structures in front yards all the way. It would, ruin the Kennedyvilles and the Still Bonds and the Hortons.
Mm-hmm.
But without knowing what it would look like, I can't comment. Anyone on the phone or stream want to talk? Any other comments there? Go ahead.
On that, on the structure, I mean, and you would know who I'm talking about, there was, and there's probably maybe some of these people still today that are essentially tenant farmers, but they own a piece of ground and they may have a shop there and keep their equipment. And why shouldn't they be allowed to do that? I mean, you go down Quaker Neck Road, here's your Dave Kelly, perfect example where he had a,
No, I was where it's placed. Now his is perfect because it's not in the front yard.
well, it's, yeah, but it kind of,
It's
it's front,
the side yard.
it's fine, but
Yeah, it does exist. Yeah, I agree. That's fine.
yeah, it's kind of like what's front, what in, I don't think anyone's gonna build a shed right in front of their house.
Well,
I don't think.
if you have a wide set yard, like a wide lot, say you put, your house is out here and you want to put a big barn conveniently over there. If your neighbor's set back as a house, he doesn't want to look at the barn in front of his house in a village zone.
Well, you just hit the nail on the head there, in the village zone. There's different, if you want to do it in an agriculture district, that's fine.
Well, and then it gets to
In the village, it's a whole different
And
aspect.
it depends if it's a quarter of an acre or if it's 6 acres. I mean, that's part of the problem we have. Some of our village zones are large areas. Or could be large areas.
Well, I agree. That's why I said this to me is the clarification of what you can do here.
A lot of the village zone is in the center of villages, or in the, you got Lock Paulus in a,
Well, yeah,
You
you
got-
got the same way.
you got Wharton, you've got,
I don't see that happening. The other thing.
yeah, but
is
you can't
just-
see it. We're making a rule for that area, not whether you can see it or not. You're gonna allow it to happen or not. And do you want that to happen? You want to happen in Millington? You want to happen
But not
in
Millington and
Galena?
Rockall, Galena, there's,
It's not gonna happen.
they're not our, that are,
There's some village.
There is some village land adjacent to the incorporated limits, yes, but not much.
The other thing, this 20 acre thing really needs to be addressed. If a property has an FSA number recognized by USDA as a farm, I don't think Kent County should be saying it's not a farm. And there's zillions of them all over this county. I don't know what's arbitrary about this 20 acres. I've got several properties that are 20 acres or less. They have an individual FSA number or recognized by USDA as farmers. And I think Kent County should recognize them too. I mean, that's part of this question here. I don't think we should put limits on the size of what your property should be to be considered a farm. If USDA recognizes it, I think Kent County should.
so
I don't care if it's 5 acres. I mean, we have one that's 5 acres. That's actually 4.9 acres. And it's a recognized farm with an FSA number.
Is it contiguous to other farmland? Or is it just a separate lot?
Contiguous to our farmland?
Is that 4.9 acres, is that contiguous to other farmland right alongside of it? And is it in the agricultural district?
Yes, it would be in agriculture.
but what a farm should be 20 acres, the FSA numbers, I mean, they're down to, I've seen FSA numbers with an acre a tenth. I mean,
And that, what's wrong with that?
yeah, I'm saying whether it's we're talking about use, I think is more, we're talking about other things is whether, does that person building a barn on 6
Well,
acres, are they a farm?
These are two different issues.
Yeah,
here.
right.
It's listed here, two different issues.
Right.
I mean, I guess I went on to the next issue. Just, I know we had this discussion before about what is a farm, and we've always said in King County it's 20 acres. It's I researched that a little bit, and I think there was 240 properties that are considered farms by FSA in King County. So I don't think we should be, about 20 acres or less. And I don't think we should be saying they're not farms.
mean, I guess it depends on what we're using the definition for. I mean, you can farm, obviously, the ag uses happens on up down to 5 acres if you can do the income limits, but whether we need to change the definition for what we use it for, that's the question. You know, we're using it for this, you know, the buildings. I mean, I don't know what this gentleman or
Yeah, I
person.
don't know what this case is. And this one's a little bit different because it sounds like it's in the village. So.
Yeah.
This particular property is right on the edge.
Is it in village?
It's zoned village, but it sits on the edge of a village.
Any other comments from anyone? Yeah, that's what I said. That
Maybe we watch the village area.
please gas for ag use.
I would say even if they change the zoning, it's not going to change whether or not they're a farm under current regulations.
So that again.
Even if the zoning changes, it will not change whether we can, it won't change whether or not we define them as a farm. Because that definition,
We have 20,
correct.
if we change to 20 acres.
Yes, that's why I said under current regulations. I don't know. They probably do.
Just ask for it. Yeah, pretty much. A separate parcel.
If you had a 3/4 acre parcel and your house on it.
No, you have to be able to follow crop for,
Yeah, you gotta
follow the
You gotta follow some
NAP,
guidelines.
FSA rules and what's agriculture
Yeah,
use.
That's what I was asking. Well,
And they basically, they involve cropland, not, you know, but
I don't think we should be more restrictive. Federal government than state government. Not in Kingston, well, if we're gonna pride ourselves on being an agricultural county and say, oh, no, this one, you know, people can't be farmers. I mean, you know.
very good, okay. Bill, you have something there? Ready to?
I was just gonna venture into the land of danger and say.
You're tired.
Well, no, just about farms. I mean, I think the fact that the land use ordinance talks about certain things being called farms that are over 20 acres is because of the things that we regulate. In the sense that the uses, when you have a farm, you get other stuff, tenant buildings. It sort of is, and this is, and you know, Carla, correct me because I'm sort of doing a big passover on this, but it seems like the 20 acres is really about allowing people to have more uses that kind of need more room. It's not really that we're saying, well, you're not a farm. We're just saying for the purposes of zoning, we're using the term farm and it's 20 acres and you get more stuff because you have a bigger area. So we could probably, you know, redefine that term if the term is the sticking point and call it, you know, large farms are 20 acres and on large farms you can have blank, and on small farms you can't. I mean, I think it's really more about trying to not allow a whole bunch of uses and buildings on a really teeny tiny property that might not be appropriate. I don't think it's about sort of excluding people from the farm club, if that makes sense. I think it's more about size. So if that helps.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it.
I would agree.
You agree? Okay, cool. Thank you.
You can only build so much on a piece of ground. You can build a building on top of a building.
That's true. That's true. Maybe we can come up with a different term, so it doesn't feel like we're excluding farmers.
I'm just.
Yeah.
Is anyone online or on the phone have comments, questions? It's 7 minutes after 8. Is there any reason we couldn't stop if someone thought that was a good idea? Someone else besides me. Thanks, Bill. Look, we got through most. We just have the enclave, but that takes a little longer now. And we have the noise ordinance too. Can we just move those on, or do we know? Or I guess that begs the next question that you're going to come forward and tell us.
Our next meeting is scheduled at the end of July. We can certainly put those items on, and things start kind of backing up a little bit. And I wanted to mention, as you noticed, we don't have anyone clerking the meeting. We've lost our part-time employee who clerks the meeting. So all taking turns doing minutes. So my turn has come up, so I will be doing the minutes for this meeting. So they will be succinct. So I'll let you know that. We can certainly put items that we don't address at this meeting at the next meeting.
I'm looking for the date again.
That's
What date are we
right now.
in July?
In July, we are meeting in,
27th?
I believe so. Yes, that sounds right.
Yep, 27th. That's after the fair. Yeah, the fair's later this week, but later this year, but that's still before the 27th.
Good, I'm glad it's not a conflict.
Do you have anything else for your Carl staff? Anything for us before our next charge? Besides do our homework on the conditions on those.
Well, starting the next meeting, we're going to try to focus on the consultant's work. Right, our process has been delayed for a variety of things. COVID's delayed us, staffing's delayed us. We've had some changes in the way we've approached these meetings, which have slowed things down. So we're going to try to wrap up the consultant's contract by the end of the year, calendar year. So we want to focus on their products. So I would request that maybe when we do old business at the next meeting, perhaps we can do old business at the end of the meeting. That way, if we can release the consultant, he can do his part first, if that's acceptable.
Yeah. Whatever you decide is fine.
Right, thank you.
Very good. Any other questions from the public or? And if not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I have one more question of Bill and staff here. They're going to shoot me, but.
No, I may.
And you-
I may too.
But
Involves a long answer.
no, it doesn't. It's either going to be a yes or no. We all got the packet, and I got the packet Monday because I asked for it. Is there any possible way, considering we got 2 months? Realize you're short of. Any possible way that we could get maybe just 1 week earlier so that we have the opportunity to review what we need to review? You know, let's say in a little more leisurely fashion.
We will try because
If possible.
Right.
I'm just.
the next packet is actually the materials are going to be by our consultant, so I'll have to check with them. You know, we've given them a timeline for production.
And you can see the reason I'm asking. I mean,
Sure.
You know, look at tonight, we were putting things off, we're doing, you know,
Mhm.
it just would be a little more helpful, I would like to put a little more thought into it, be very honest with you. I'm just being perfectly honest.
Yep.
And if we can, I think that, I don't know how everybody else feels, but I would like, it would give us a little more chance to review it. And just looking at it on a laptop over a weekend is real tough.
Okay.
Yeah.
All righty.
Thank you. Okay, motion to adjourn.
Motion.
So moving. Thank you all.
Thank you.